Hello, this is Michelle, and we're going into part 16. Just going to read a short scripture here. This is from Colossians chapter 3, verse 1 through 4. If you then were raised with Christ, desire those things which are above, when Christ sits at the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things of earth. For you are dead, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then you also shall appear with him in glory. What this is talking about is after we have gone through the symbolic water baptism, wherein we are symbolically going under the water as to go become dead with Christ Jesus, dead to the world, and then coming out of the water alive to Jesus Christ, and the spiritual realities he teaches us, and the love he gives us and that we give others. And it's telling us, to keep our mind on what's above, where he is right now, after he resurrected, after he'd been in the grave for 3 days, and as he said he would, he resurrected out of the grave. He was seen by at least 500 people who saw him with the holes in his hands and his feet and on his side. I don't know that everybody saw it on his side because of his clothes, but anyway. And it says your life is hidden with Christ in God. And it's, to me, the way I think of it. I'm sure there's other ways and more levels of how to think of this, but to me, I think of it a lot as protection, how he protects me. There's a lot of experiences that I've had and dreams I've had where I could see I could have easily gotten in really big trouble of some kind or in danger, and I was overlooked because I believe I was hidden by God in Christ. Anyway, until he comes to get us and resurrects our bodies, we are still living in our regular flesh, plus becoming a new person in him. And that's requires some effort on our part, and intention and love and dedication. And these are the kind of things the Bible and Jesus teach us about. And these are things I really didn't understand when I came for the second time to Jesus, the time that I've just now been talking about. I didn't know much. There were a lot of churches by then, and they continue today, that kind of stop at, okay, you believe in Jesus and you get baptized, and okay, you're done, everything's fine, and when Jesus comes, he'll take you up, and there's a lot of people just trying to enjoy the world while they wait, and that's not exactly what he's teaching in the Bible. It's so good to read it for yourself. Okay, so here we get back to I was starting to question the Bible, and there were different things happening, like another really wonderful thing that happened was, I forgot to mention, I was actually working after I quit the job with that Lech lawyer. I actually got it was weird, it was sort of in between a factory job and an office job, working for a business forms company. And it really felt like I was a cog in a factory. It was really pretty boring too, but anyway, it was some steady work with good fringe benefits had I stayed. Um, and I was there for a little while. Um, it's not that interesting to tell you that part of the story, so I'm going to kind of skip through that, except to say I did work there for a while before I started doing the pizza stuff. And I was making a little bit better money then. That's probably when I finished off paying the IRS. And I had started looking for churches to go to, and didn't really want to go to the one that my grandmother had gone to back when she was still going to church. It was a Church of Christ, and they were famous for being strict, whatever that meant, but that didn't sound good to me. And also, they didn't allow instruments, and I thought that was weird. But anyway, I just didn't decide to. I didn't necessarily want to go to a place where everybody be like, "Oh, you're the granddaughter of Mary Lou," and all of that. So I did not go to her church. I might have been better off had I gone. But anyway, I started looking, and the first church I remember going to is the one I told you about, where it had the pastor that he and his father acted like I was possessed by demons when I had at a prayer meeting stood up to expel the demons in the room. And before that happened, I went to that church several times, and I remember it was a church that they believed that everybody gets the gift of speaking in tongues. I hadn't read about it, so I didn't really have an opinion about whether you had to or everybody did or not, but he was offering it, and he said, well, if you want to speak in tongues, just come to the front, and I'll lay hands on you, and you can speak in tongues. And I thought, well, that sounds good. And I went up there. I had my back to the audience or the congregation, and he put his hands on me, and he did some of his language that is not understandable, and I didn't feel anything, and so I didn't do anything. And then he kept doing it over and over again, like, come on, go ahead and do it. And much to my disgrace, I faked it. I just wanted to go sit down again, and I didn't know how to get out of that situation, so I just pretended that I had received tongues, and I went la da ba da ka la la, whatever, and did it just long enough that it was like, okay, and I got to go sit down. I felt really bad about that. I knew that I hadn't really received anything. And anyhow, other than that, I enjoyed his preaching. It sounded pretty good to me. But I wanted to add a couple things that are kind of interesting about all that and he was the same one who said, I'm not going to baptize you. And it was weird. It was like he was treating me like I was some minion of the devil. And so that's when I quit going to that church. But then as I was checking many different churches, I don't know how many, maybe half a dozen in that town before I left town, maybe more. One place I had gone it was in a big suite in an office building. And there were some people that I recognized from that charismatic church that I had gone to with that pastor. Apparently some people had left that church, and I didn't have anybody that I knew that was going to tell me what was going on with that church. But some people were aware of who I was because of that day at the prayer meeting, and there was a man there that I recognized from that church, and after the assembly we had there, he came up to me and he said, "Did you hear what happened to the pastor and his father at that church?" And I said, "No, what?" And he said they were both caught red-handed stealing money from the church to buy their own homes. And so they had been publicly disgraced. And I thought that was interesting. But at that, I was talking about how I was starting to feel kind of confused. One of the things I didn't know, I didn't understand at all, and I'm going to tell you now because I never knew this, was that when you first become a Christian, especially if there's still some open doors left, things that you have not repented for, and, given your regret to God, to Jesus, and asked him to forgive you, then those doors stay open. And those are doors, those are some doors that, any doors of sin, any kind of sin, leaves a door open for the enemy to come in and try to influence you. He has a lot bigger crack at you, let me put it that way. He's always trying to influence us, even, I'm sure, the very most dedicated followers of Jesus Christ in this world. He's always trying to influence them, always trying to catch them at something. And but if there's some open doors, then he's going to go right for him, and he's going to come at you as hard as he can. And I've heard of a lot of people that had gotten more deeply into things like more deeply than I had, with things like witchcraft and or Satanism even, or trying to speak to the dead, using psychics and going to mediums, and either going to somebody who's doing channeling or channeling themselves, and all of this. People have gotten really deep into that. They tend to, even after they've repented, it seems like the enemy just tries real hard to come after them for a while. I'm not sure exactly how that works legally or anything else, but and when you listen to a lot of testimonies, you'll find that's true. And I didn't know that I was going to get attacked by the enemy, and especially since I had not repented for making Maraji an idol. I mean, it was the worst kind of idol, where I actually was thinking of him as the Lord of the universe at some points. I mean, how crazy is that? But it was bad, and I spent years of my life and serving him, and that was definitely something I should have repented for, and I wasn't understanding anything about idolatry. I didn't know about idolatry, and that doesn't make it okay. So it didn't keep me free from him using that door to trick me again. And so I remember one of the things that happened at that particular office place that had the church people. Some people, they were invited to get up and give their testimonies or sing a song. And there was a song that I had learned in the ashram that had been supposedly written by Maraji, about him writing to God. And I didn't see any problem with, this shows how off I was, I didn't see any problem with singing that song, but I would be singing it to Jesus. And it had a sound to it. You could kind of tell it wasn't real Christian sounded, because I was singing about being at his feet in a way like the Hindus do, something like that. I think you could almost tell that it was just not, it just had a funny feeling to it, I guess, to the guy who was the pastor there. And for some reason I went to his office after the meeting. I don't remember if he had invited me to his office or if I went to ask a question. I just don't know. And I went in there, and very quickly he told me that he could tell that I had the spirit of deception. And when he said that, I thought he meant that he thought I was trying to deceive him and the church. And I definitely wasn't. I was madly in love with Jesus, and I wanted Jesus, and I wanted to be closer to him, and all of that. And so I only took that as an affront. I was just like, I just was offended. And he didn't say anything else. He didn't offer to deliver me or anything. Not and I left. And I think that was interesting. So anyway, another wonderful thing that happened to me during those early days, and before I started like looking at the other books like the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ and the Urantia book, and that's another channeled book that's supposed to be from probably from what people call ancient aliens, you know, from another cosmology, and it's an extremely thick book. There used to be groups of people that would get together just to study that book. It was a really big, heavy book. It must have been 3,000 pages, onion skin. And they had Jesus in there. So I thought that one was true too. And I can't remember what other ones I had, but I've always been a book lover, so, you know, I had a few of these New Age type books. And if they talked about Jesus, I figured they were true. Anyway, before I started getting into those books again, I got woken up. I was just having such a wonderful time. I was always praying to God all the time, singing to him, loving him, reading the Bible. I used to pray every night before I went to bed, please, Lord, wake me up at 4 a.m. so I can read the Bible for a couple of hours before I get ready for work, because I want to know you better. See, I started out on a pretty good foot in some ways, you know. And so it was around that time, and I woke up one morning. It was probably a Sunday. I don't think it was a day that I had to go to work, because it was already light out, and if I was getting up at 4 a.m, it would have been dark out. Anyhow, I woke up to the sound. Right behind me was the wall, and if you knocked on it, it sounded kind of like knocking on wood. It had wallpaper covering it. And above my headboard, I woke up hearing the sound of knocks on the wood above my head behind the headboard. And so, you know, I just opened my eyes, and I looked up, and I was surprised to see it was like a silver cross. It was kind of shimmering, and it looked like a living cross almost. It was kind of just vibrant somehow. It wasn't huge. It was like maybe 2 inches tall. And I was trying to look at it and see if Jesus was on it. Of course, not being Catholic and then realizing what's not so good about Jesus having crucifixes with Jesus on the cross, as if he were still on the cross, because he's not still there, and we're really, really glad that he's not. And he's resurrected and alive and powerful and wonderful, and I don't want to keep in still motion that worst experience of his. And well, anyway, I don't know all the details. I just was wondering, is he there? Is he there on the cross? And I never saw. I didn't see him there. It was just the cross. And then I looked away and I thought, geez, could this be a hallucination? But then I was thinking, but I don't hallucinate. I'm really not a person that hallucinates. I hadn't done, other than that one half of a joint that I had smoked a week or two before, uh, I had not done any drugs at all for, I don't know how long, but a pretty long time. And even when I did drugs, it was so unusual for me to hallucinate. And so I thought, well, but maybe it is a hallucination. And I thought, well, if I look at it real hard, then if it's a hallucination, then maybe it'll disappear. And so I looked back up again, and it was still there. And it just stayed. And I looked at it, I was just staring at it. And it stayed just as solid looking as it was before. And then it looked like a cloven tongue of flames, which you could compare to a dove that's flying downward as far as the shape, but the color was more of fire. And so that's why I used the word like a flame. And it had a couple breaks in it, so that it was like tongues or a cloven tongue. And it came out right at the bottom of that cross. It appeared at the bottom of that cross. And I looked and I was like, whoa, what's that? Like I was so surprised. And then it started to move toward me in the most graceful movement I've ever seen. I've never seen anything so great, not such a graceful movement ever again in my life or before, never. There was something about it that was truly heavenly. I mean, it had to be the Lord. I mean, it was so beautiful. Just the gracefulness of that movement, of it coming toward me, was just phenomenal. And it came pretty close to me. I don't know exactly, but I was watching it, and it seemed to just come like, I don't know, maybe within a foot of my head. And right then, it just kind of disappeared. And right when it disappeared, I felt this vibration start at the top of my head, and it went down through my entire body all the way to my feet. And it's like, wow, I don't think I knew about the Holy Spirit yet. So it was really, I knew about speaking in tongues. I knew there was such a thing as speaking in tongues, but I really was not introduced yet to the Holy Spirit, and as far as anything much. And so, but I was like, wow, and the vibrations that I felt in my body didn't seem to last all that long. I don't know how long, 5-10 minutes or something. But the part that went down all the way to my feet, and my feet continued to not only feel that vibration, but I felt a burning. And it was weird, because it was a burning like fire, and yet, and it didn't feel good exactly, but it didn't feel that bad either. And I felt like it was burning out some dross out of my body. I felt like it was cleansing me somewhat or something, and it was doing it through my feet. And what was really interesting also about that was that I looked at the time, and I was watching the time, because that feeling with my feet lingered for many hours. In fact, what I counted at the time was 14 hours before the burning sensation went away. And it wasn't like a burning, like, ouch, get me some cold water. I didn't do that, and I didn't feel that way. But it was a discomfort I could definitely live with. That's the only way I know how to put it. And I felt like this is good. This is something that's supposed to be happening, and so I was okay about it. And I guess I made the mistake of telling people. I told my grandmother about it. Told my grandmother about all these experiences, and she told her friend, a friend of hers from church, who was a Sunday school teacher. And that Sunday school teacher at one point invited me to come to her house. She said, I have some slides and I'd like to give you some Bible teaching. Would you like that? And I said, sure, that sounds great. And so she came and she picked me up and she took me to her house and she put up the projector and she was showing me a Bible story. It was all very nice. And then when it was done, she wanted to talk to me for a bit. And she said, so I hear you've been having some unusual experiences with Jesus. And I said, yes. And I told her about it. And she said, well, I've been a Christian my entire life. At that time, she was maybe 50 or 60 years old. And she said, and I've never experienced anything like that. So why would you, who just came to Jesus, why would you experience that and I haven't? I didn't know what to tell her. I really didn't know the answer to that question. And then I realized I thought maybe I shouldn't have told about this because maybe it will cause other people to feel doubt about their own experience or whatever. That was pretty much when I started shutting up about it. And my only answer I could give her was, I don't know, maybe I need it more. And, looking back, it's so funny because I think I accidentally gave her the exact correct answer. I think I did need it. I needed it really badly because one thing she and I both didn't know at that time was that I was about to basically apostatize for the next almost 30 years. So I needed a really good shot of Jesus to keep me holding on to him and him holding on, me holding on to him enough that I wasn't denying him. I never in that 30 years did I deny Jesus. I just forgot about him a lot. And it's just so weird to remember that most of that 30 years, not the first 2 years, the first 2 years I was doing pretty good keeping with him. But after, I'd say the last 28 years of that, I identified as a Christian, but I never thought about Jesus. I never read the Bible, and I forgot to pray. And I didn't consider, I went off onto, I was very deceived. I don't want to jump ahead of myself too fast. So I'm going to get back to what happened a little bit later. But first I should talk more about what was going on at this time. So I was trying out different churches. One of the churches I saw, I was so naive. I didn't know about different churches and what their names meant. I had no concept about it. And there was one church that said, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I thought, well, that sounds good. That's a church for Jesus. And I had no idea that was Mormons. If I had known it was Mormons, I would not have gone because my stepmother had told me some things that made me know that I would never be interested in Mormonism. But I didn't get that it was Mormon. I just thought it was another name for another church about Jesus. And so I went, found out their hours, and I went. And of course, I didn't realize when I went, because when you go to a church, a lot of times you feel like you're just one person kind of lost in the crowd, but especially at churches that are not too big, they all recognize each other and they can tell right away when there's somebody new. And so I'm sure they all recognized right away that I was somebody new. And but they were already starting up, so it was too late for them to kind of change their schedule. I think they probably would have changed their schedule a little bit if they'd known they were going to have a guest. And so I went into the Sunday school that they had. I have a feeling like I already told you this story, but that might be one of the videos that I had to delete. So I'm going to presume I have not told you about this yet. So in the Sunday school, it was all adults in there. And I don't really remember if it was both men and women or if it was just women. I just don't remember that. And the teacher was talking about how in order to get to the higher levels of heaven, you had to be married. I'd never heard such a thing as that before, and I thought that sounded crazy. It just didn't sound right to me at all. Especially because I was so madly in love with Jesus that at that very time, as boy crazy as I had been my entire life and continued to be later in life, at that particular time I was not boy crazy. I just wanted Jesus. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense because I'm not interested in getting married. I just want to be with Jesus. And I don't see how that would make me go to a lower place in heaven. And she let that be said. There was no real answer to that. And then anyway, after that, they probably said some other things that didn't sound right to me, but that was the main thing I remember there. And then after that, we went to what I assumed would be the worship service, like in churches that I'd been to before. They would have the Sunday school, and then you'd go to the sanctuary and, get some, the preacher would give a sermon. That's what I was kind of expecting. And we went into a room. It looked like a sanctuary. And everybody sat down. And the guy up in front said something about, I don't know if it was a special day for witnessing. I guess it was. Or maybe they had changed it just for me because I was there. Who knows? But it became a special day for witnessing. He didn't give much of a sermon. If he did, it was very short. And then he asked people to give their testimonies. And I thought, oh boy, this is going to be so fun to hear how people came to Jesus. I was really like, oh yeah, this is going to be the good stuff. And one after one, people would stand up and they would all, it was almost word for word, they'd all start with the same thing. They'd say, well, I'm here to testify that was it John Smith? Was that his name? It might be, I forget sometimes, but it's something like John Smith, if it's not John Smith, who started the Mormon church back in the 1800s. Joseph Smith, that's what his name is. They'd say, I testify that Joseph Smith is true. They'd say something like that. And then they didn't have a story to give. They didn't really have much of a testimony except to say that Joseph Smith was true, and maybe they had one or two other sentences. There wasn't much meat there or anything to sink your teeth into. And then somebody else would stand up and they would all say the same thing. And I'm telling you the truth, not one person even mentioned Jesus in that entire thing. By the time I left that, I waited till it was all over to go to my car. And by the time it was all over, I had not heard one person ever mention Jesus. And I thought, that is so weird. they have the name of Jesus on the sign on their church, and they're talking about somebody called Joseph Smith instead. And I don't know if I realized it at the time, but if I didn't realize it at the time, I looked it up and found out real quick that that was Mormons. And of course, I never went back there again. Then I went to another church that was called Unity Church. I thought, well, that sounds nice. It sounded familiar. I was checked, and I said, it's not Unitarian, is it? No, it's not Unitarian, because I knew that Unitarian wasn't really for Jesus either. I knew that that was sort of it was the kind of church my parents went to when we lived in California. It was where atheists and agnostic people went so that they could say they went to church. At least that, in my view as a kid, that's what I thought they were doing, is pretending. Anyway. So I went to Unity Church, and I walked in there. It was, again, a large office suite rather than a church building. And there was a big circle of chairs, and a lot of people were there. It looked like I was one of the last people to show up. And not one person greeted me. And I'm sure they knew I was new, because they all knew each other so well. And so I just sat down, and they kept kind of socializing with each other. And to tell you the truth, I left before they ever got around to starting doing whatever it is they did, because I felt so alone and hurt that nobody cared to even say hello to me. I needed to go cry, and I wanted to leave. I wanted to leave before I cried, because that would have been embarrassing to cry in front of them. So that was the Unity Church. Of course, from what I learned about that church later, that would not have been a good church either. It was, might as well call it Unitarian. They're different, but the same basic thing as Unitarian, really. They just, it's not really about Jesus. It's what today might be called New Age or whatever. Following the culture, following your own mind, whatever. But thinking that by doing that, you're being a good person. And I went to some other places, but nothing else is really sticking out in my mind right now. Okay, so I think I mentioned the man that I had phone sex with. And at the time I came to Jesus, I still did not know, of course, that he was married. And it was the lady who, somehow I had told her about him. I think maybe she asked me if I had a boyfriend or something, and I told her about him. And I knew his name, and I said his name. And she got back to me a day or two later, and she said, Michelle, that guy that you've been seeing, he's married, and his wife is a Sunday school teacher. And I don't know if she's the one who told me or he's the one who later told me that he used to be a preacher. I think he's the one who told me. So anyway, when she told me that, I was shocked. And, as a Christian now, of course, so I didn't have to look in the Bible to know that it's not good to be with a married man or, do adultery. And so the next time he called me, I told him that I had become a Christian and that I wasn't going to be, sexual with people anymore on dates. And that I said, besides, I can't see you anymore at all. And he said, why? And I said, because I found out that you're married. And he said, well, didn't you know I was married? And I said, how would I know? You didn't tell me. He said, I was wearing my wedding ring the whole time. That made me feel pretty foolish, but it's true. I just never looked. And it's weird that I would not notice it, but I didn't. And anyway, he was blown away. He was like, Are you telling me the truth? Are you really mean it that you're not going to see me anymore because you became a Christian? And I said, yeah. And he was just blown away. It was just like he, it must have meant something to him because he was really blown away by that. And I sure hope that he returned to Jesus. I never talked to him or saw him again. Well, I did one more time, but I'm not going to get into that. It's just not a... You don't have to know every single embarrassing thing that ever happened to me, right? We're making these videos long enough. Anyhow, also around this time, I heard from Sullivan again. Oh, and this is something I'd left out about Sullivan. He's the one who had said that he saw the satanic ritual outside somewhere in Denton, and I had discovered while dating him, we would go to his apartment sometimes and have sexual relations, and he told me a few things about himself. And one thing is that he liked to play a game called Dungeons and Dragons. Is that what it's called? I think that's the name of it. Dungeons and Dragons. There's people that still do it today. But this was back in early 1983. And he had a big sword on his wall, and some stuff that seemed very Renaissance looking. And that was, I think, when I asked him about the sword, it was somehow for him that somehow connected with his enjoyment of a game called Dungeons and Dragons. And I think he took the sword off the wall and he was like pretending that he was using, like, I don't know. I wasn't very into all that, but anyway, he talked about that. And then also during the times we'd been intimate, he told me that he used to be an altar boy at an Episcopalian church. And he knew that I had just become a Christian, and or maybe he was telling me about this before I became a Christian. I can't really remember. I think it was before I don't know. I think it was before I became a Christian he told me this, that they taught him a lot of things, and there was something about, there was a certain number of holes in the body, and they taught him how to seal those holes so that demons couldn't get in. Something like that. I was really surprised. I didn't know altar boys did stuff like that. I didn't really think about it a whole lot, and I knew that Episcopalian was kind of like Catholic light, so I didn't have any interest in it. I'd gotten turned off to Catholicism when I was about 11, when I asked a relative, because I had an uncle that was Catholic. They took me to their church one time, and they didn't have a cover for my head, and they had me wear a napkin on my head. All the girls had to have something on their head, so I had to go in there with a napkin on my head. And that was still, at that time, at that church, they were still doing the Latin. So the whole service was pretty much in Latin. Couldn't understand anything they said. And then they'd ring bells, and you'd sit down and sit up, stand up, sit down. And that's all I really remember from that church. Very, very ritualistic. And apologies for the phone. Let me just, well, good, it stopped. Okay. So later I was curious because I knew the rest of that family. He was my dad's only brother, that uncle. And I knew the rest of that family was Southern Baptist, and I wondered why Uncle Bob was Catholic. And it was explained to me that he was Catholic because he wanted to marry Eileen, and she was Catholic, and they can only marry other Catholics. And so he had converted. And so then I asked, well, what's the difference between being a Baptist and being a Catholic? And someone told me, well, the Catholics have a pope, and they believe that he is the representative of Jesus on earth. She said something to that effect. And that just didn't sound right to me. It just sounded really wrong. It was like it was almost more than representative. It was like he was as if he were Jesus on earth. So, for me, I never had any attraction to the Catholic Church. And the more I learned about it, the more I wasn't interested, because what I did read in the Bible, there was so much that went absolutely against what I'd read in the Bible. Like, for instance, how Jesus said, call no man father. Well, that's a little confusing if you have a father that, your biological father. But I just figured out, well, he must mean don't call anybody except your biological father. I mean, that's the only way I could figure out that it meant. And it's like, why is the Catholic Church having all these people called priests be called father? In fact, you say father every time you say their name. Father Pio, Father whoever you are, And that was in direct disobedience to the Bible. And there was other things like that I noticed over the years that I've never had any interest. They also, instead of in the Bible, it says that Jesus is our mediator. He's our advocate in heaven to the Father. And the Catholic Church says that their priests are the people you confess to, and then who the mediator is Mary instead of Jesus. I mean, and then the priests will, depending on what your sin was that you confess, and they'll say, say 200 Hail Marys. And they take beads, which is very Hindu. That's what the Hindus did, was they would have beads and they'd say chants with their beads. So I just, none of that made any sense to me. And I think it's very interesting. Well, I'll just mention it. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm just telling the truth as I know it. Is that the Catholic Church could probably be called one of the first spy networks in the world, a very big spy network, because you had priests that were finding out the secrets of people, and they aren't supposed to tell anyone, but guess what if they did? You could have this giant spy network. And they did cover the globe pretty big. They got really, really big, and they got very, anyway, I'm not going to go into it. So, even though I was not attracted to the Catholic Church, I was having such trouble finding a good church to go to. One day I thought, well, I knew that my biological mother went to the Catholic Church there. And the timings they had, I didn't go at the same time she was going. I don't remember what day of the week it was or anything like that. I think it was the week of when they put the gray on your forehead. And I went there once. And that was really odd. I'm not going to say anything else about that. It just, something I don't understand, and my telling you isn't going to make you understand it either, so I'm just not going to mention it. Let's move on. Okay, what else? Okay, what I think I did leave out, I was trying to hurry with my early childhood, but my mother, my biological mother, she had two brothers, two full brothers through my grandfather. And they were both pretty messed up people, just from what I experienced. And the younger of the two, my Uncle Frank, he was, I believe, also younger. Yeah, he was definitely younger than my mother. I think she was in the middle of the two ages of the two boys. And I was left with him as a little baby. Well, maybe one, I don't know exactly how old, 1 or 2 or whatever, because my parents were both working and going to school, and they would just leave me with my grandmother to babysit. Or maybe sometimes my grandfather would be there, but he didn't babysit. But if he was there, I was always delighted to see him. Anyway, sometimes, well, my grandmother was still had a job at that time. She worked at a shoe store, and so they were sometimes gone, and they would leave my Uncle Frank to watch me. So when I was like 2, he was 9. No, when I was 1, he was 9, and when I was 2, he was 10. You know, we were 8 years apart. And during the time that I lived with my grandmother, I saw him. I had seen him before. I'm not going to go into the whole thing with my crazy Uncle Frank. I'll just tell you this part, and that'll be enough. You'll get the idea. He had a history at that point already of going in between being a psychologist at prisons and being a preacher at churches. And in between all that, being thrown into mental institutions, because the only incident I was ever told about was that one time when he and my grandmother came to visit us in Southern California, he was at a grocery store and he jumped up on a counter of a grocery counter and said, "Now everybody calm down. I know you think I'm God." And that all ended up with him being put in a mental institution. And my parents, my family was very secretive. They never told me any of this. And it was very upsetting to me that when I was a young teen, maybe not even a teen yet, staying with my grandmother for the summer, and he would come around. That was while he was going to college to be a psychologist. And we would have really long talks, and he had, you know, the big hippie hair, kind of reminded me of Fat Freddy. He wasn't fat, but Fat Freddy's hair in the, if you ever read those comic books, the Furry Freak Brothers. Anyway, he would say things that just sounded so intelligent and so wise, and you know, I really looked up to him. And he was at that age, he was a very good looking man as well, and I just thought he was really cool. And later he had given me a ride from my grandparents' house to his mother's house, because it was a pretty long drive, 4 or 5 hours. And it was a point where I was going to go have a vacation staying with my other grandmother. And he gave me a ride, and I just thought he was a really cool uncle. And then a point came where when I was a little bit older than that, and I'd been at my grandmother's house, and I was planning to take a bus back to Denver, but I called them and I said, "Oh, Uncle Frank's going to bring me." And they said, "No, you can't ride with Uncle Frank." And I said, "Why?" And they would not tell me. All this time, they never told me that he had ever been in a mental hospital. There were any issues about him. He had a sort of beatniky thing going on with him, too, that I thought was really cool. I just thought he was a really cool guy. And they gave me no warning whatsoever. Only thing they did was tell me that I couldn't come home with him. And he didn't say any, he took it well when I told him that they wouldn't allow him to take me, but he didn't tell me anything either. But that was the only red flags I ever got about my Uncle Frank. Well, anyway, there I was living with my grandmother. Now Uncle Frank is older. He's been married and divorced by now, has two young boys that his ex-wife has custody of, and he's not a psychologist and he's not a preacher. I don't know what he was doing at the time to make money. And I was in the only bedroom, the only extra bedroom in that house. And he came to visit pretty rarely. And then at one point, it was after I'd come to Jesus, and he came to visit, and he had a longer stay. I don't remember where he slept. He must have had a sleeping bag in the front room. I just don't remember. But I remember getting really upset because my grandmother, she was like 4'11". She was a cute little old thing. And I used to tell her, "Oh, Nani," that's what I called her, was Nani. I'd say, "Nani, you're so cute." And she said, "That's what everybody tells me." And she was really cute. Anyway, and he was not that tall, but compared to her, he towered over her. He was about 5'8", 5'9" at the most. And I heard him yelling at her in the living room, and all I could hear was he was telling her that I'm the son, so this is my house, and you have to do what I say. And it was just, and he'd get right up in her face yelling at her. It was very scary. It was very threatening the way he was being toward her, and she just stood there and she just took it. He wanted access to her money. She had saved up, I think, $20,000, and he wanted some of that money, and he felt it was his money because he was the son. And I just